What Kate had failed to realize was that in the event of spousal demise, Edison became her power of attorney. This meant nothing. It was Edison who got to choose what to do next. Edison wanted to honor Kate's request of Evie becoming Atticus's legal guardian. He was in the public eye now. Atticus was legally his son, and he didn't mention the child's paternity in the newspaper. Edison sat his sisters-in-law down for a conversation. He had decided that it was too difficult to see Kate's sisters every day, so he asked them to move out. He was not a complete monster. He arranged for them to live in a nice home in Brichester and would live comfortably. Evie and Judy did not care about where they lived. Their concern was Atticus and his well-being. Evie promised her sister on the very day she passed away that she would look after her son. Evie begged for Edison to reconsider. She reminded him that he was not Atticus's biological father. This enraged Edison, and he screamed profanities at them. Edison yells at both of them. He says that their sister left him with a mess that he was trying to clean up. Atticus was legally his son, and he would not abandon him in his time of need. Kate's sisters knew that his reasoning was absolute rubbish. He never once tried to bond with Atticus. The child needed love right now. Judy begged her brother-in-law to reconsider. She suggested that they could take Atticus back to their home in Willow Creek. Edison informed them that he had sold that property 2 days ago. They had two options: leave with Atticus and he would call the police, or move out and live comfortably with just the two of them. Judy begged Edison. She could not imagine her life without her nephew. He needed his aunts. She promised that they would never tell a soul who Atticus was, and they would never return to Del Sol Valley. It was no use. Evie screamed at him and called the man heartless. Evie was absolutely devastated. She failed her sister, and now she was failing her nephew. There was nothing she could do about it. She wanted to sneak him away, but Evie and Judy would be no help to him behind bars. Instead of fighting harder, Evie resigned herself to this fate. She put on a brave face for her nephew and gave him the biggest hug. Judy felt so guilty. She promised she would always be Atticus's buddy and protect her, but she was failing him. She whispered to her nephew that this was not their choice, and they loved him dearly. She hugged him tightly and begged him not to forget them or his mummy. Judy and Evie walk out of the home where their nephew was born. Their sister passed away, and where their darling nephew was still being held captive by their brother-in-law. Every step broke their hearts into more pieces. Their family was in shambles. Neither would fully recover. Not really. They would worry about Atticus every day for the rest of their lives. Atticus was severely distraught after his aunties were kicked out of the townhouse. First his mummy went to heaven, and now his aunties were gone. He had no one to give him love anymore. His father was as cold as ice towards him. In the months following his auntie's departure, Atticus tried to entertain himself by playing with toys that were given by them. He missed them so much. He was confined to his room except for mealtimes. His father had bought him every toy on the market. Atticus began to wonder if he bought him toys so he didn't actually have to spend time with him. Atticus was so lonely. Edison only saw Atticus during meals. He tried not to take his anger out on the child, but he was reminded of Kate in the throes of love with Harrison. Atticus was a perfect mixture of his parents. No Edison to be found. On the occasion that Edison heard Atticus crying for attention, he would try to interact with the boy. He always ended up yelling at him to stop crying. He didn't mean to be cruel to the child, but warmth for Atticus didn't come naturally. Atticus began to act out after a while. He was stir-crazy in his room. He was an inquisitive boy and wanted to explore the world. He started to destroy books, furniture, anything he could get his hands on. He hoped it would get his father's attention. It got his father's attention, but instead of showing him love or affection, He only took away those items. He was upset and alone. Edison knew he was not capable of loving the child, but maybe a nanny could give Atticus that warmth he deserved. Edison hired Charlene to care for Atticus. Charlene was the top nanny in all of Del Sol Valley. He was paying a pretty penny for her services. Atticus took to his new nanny very quickly, so happy to finally have someone to dote on him and give him attention. Atticus was happier than he had been since his aunties left. Miss Charlene was strict, but only because she wanted Atticus to succeed. He was okay with a little guidance, as long as he was getting love. Now that Atticus had a nanny to tend to him, Edison had too much time to sulk over his wife's passing. She had hurt him more than anyone, but he truly loved her. He was mourning in his own twisted way. He had taken it too far with his torment, and she couldn't handle it. Kate's words in her letter to him haunted him. "You are the reason I did this, and I hope you suffer every day for the rest of your miserable life." Atticus and Miss Charlene's relationship blossomed in the months following her hiring. She taught the boy how to speak properly and told him about the adventures she had gone on during her long life. Atticus still missed his mummy and aunties, but Miss Charlene was filling that maternal role he needed in his life. She was his favorite person. When it was just he and his father, he felt like he shouldn't speak in fear of annoying him. With Miss Charlene, he was able to talk as much as he wanted, and he did. He had so much to say. He loved Miss Charlene and was grateful for her presence in his life. However, when she was in the kitchen, Atticus would play with his dolls and pretend that his mummy and aunties were home. Charlene was a fantastic chef. She has been a nanny for over 40 years, so she has had ample time in the kitchen to cook for the children she was nannying for. She saw the disconnect between father and son, so she cooked every night in hopes that it would be a time for bonding for Atticus and his father. Charlene put Atticus in his high chair after he called Edison down for dinner. She had dressed the boy in his nicest clothes in hopes that Edison would compliment him. Edison had made himself scarce around Atticus for the past several weeks. Atticus was happy to see his father, so he decided to try and impress him by singing a song that Miss Charlene just taught him. Edison did not care for the toddler's tune and yelled at him to stop. He told the boy that singing was not one of his talents. Atticus was silent for the rest of dinner. Nothing he did ever impressed his father. He couldn't understand why the man hated him so much. Edison drowned his sorrows in a glass of wine. It was so difficult for him to look at Atticus. All he saw was his late wife, and he missed her. He wished he could go back in time and change so much. Charlene cleaned up after dinner and left Atticus to his own devices. She was trying to teach him independence. After his father left the dinner table, Atticus allowed himself to cry. His father's words really upset him. Atticus found some painting supplies in the cabinets, and he decided that he would make a mess so he could convey to his father that he was upset. The paint would be difficult to clean off of the wood floor. Edison didn't know what to do about the boy. He was destructive and lashed out no matter what he bought him. Atticus was ungrateful and never satisfied. Atticus had damaged the wood floor with his paint stunt, so Edison had to hire a maid to clean up the mess. What Edison didn't foresee was the attraction he would feel for her. He tried to be suave around her, but became a fumbling mess even with his introduction to her. He didn't know why he couldn't get his words out in a coherent manner. Edison thanked her for being able to get the paint stain out of the wood and called her a miracle worker. She smiled at him, and he vowed he would get her into his bed. That would make him forget about Kate. Atticus played with the new toy that his father had gotten him. He enjoyed having a new toy to play with. but would much prefer his father spending time with him. He was young, but he was starting to get used to disappointment. His one bright light was Miss Charlene. He looked forward to bedtime every night because his nanny read him as many stories as he wanted. She read the stories in funny voices, and it never failed to make Atticus smile. He wondered what his life would be like if his mommy hadn't gone to heaven. He thinks that it would be just like how it is with Miss Charlene, but with extra love and hugs. He dreamed of his mummy often, but was beginning to forget her voice. Filming for Edison's starring role was around the corner, so he decided to invite over his co-stars and director to add to his network of connections. With Harrison gone, he needed a new agent. He invited everyone up to his personal speakeasy so they could play cards. It was a relief to play for fun and not opportunities. Edison was an incredible host with us fake charisma and charming demeanor. His guests adored him. His director had worked with his late wife, so he tried bringing her up in conversation. Edison thanked the man for his condolences and said that her passing was a loss to the entire industry. Her talent was unmatched. He changed the subject off of his late wife to how stunning his co-stars looked. He began to heavily flirt with the two women until they were called down for their feast. Charlene had prepared an elaborate meal for Edison and his guests. Edison entertained his guests with a nearly unbelievable tale of his journey to Del Sol Valley. It was filled with white lies and embellishments, of course, but the female co-stars were blown away by his story. This life was all that Edison had ever wanted. He had a famous friend and was on the brink of being Del Sol Valley's new darling. Life was complete. Atticus was locked in his room during his father's dinner party. Nobody was ever permitted to see him because they would immediately know Edison was not his father. Not that Atticus knew or would understand that. Atticus thought his father was ashamed of him and didn't want him around in fear that he would act out for attention and embarrass him. Atticus would never do that. Miss Charlene taught him to be on his best behavior in front of guests. Weeks had gone by since his successful dinner party. It was the morning of filming. He needed a little liquid courage to get him through the day. His entire career was riding on his performance today. He thought of Kate a lot today. Would she be proud of him? Would she scorn him? He hated that he would never know the answers because of his cruelty towards her. They could have been the power couple of Del Sol Valley. He arrived at the studio 20 minutes before his call time and was whisked away to hair and makeup. He felt like a superstar. He had his own room and name on his door. It was nothing like his first role. They put artificial facial hair on him so he could depict a character in the Wild West. He thought the beard was excessive, but he could get behind growing a mustache of his own. They also put a wig on him so he would have longer hair. The wig was itchy and uncomfortable to wear, but he pushed through it. This was his big break. Edison moved to wardrobe for his final costume fitting. The material was flattering to his physique, and he received plenty of compliments from the wardrobe assistant. If she were attractive, Edison would have kissed her. That's how excited he was to nearly be on the soundstage to be the star in this film. He did one final run-through of his lines. He had a good idea for how to portray his character, but when in doubt, he would improvise. He was the star of the film, so they would just have to deal with any changes he made. His excellence was automatically making this silly film better. He was the star here, or at least that's what he told himself on repeat. Judith Ward, Edison's ex, was also in this film. They had not spoken since he ended things with her. If the annoyed side eyes that Judith shot him often was any indication, she was not over his rejection. He had no scenes with her, at her request. Edison chatted with the director and suggested a few last-minute changes to the script to better suit his abilities. The director seemed frustrated but accommodated his requests. Edison lit one last ciggy to help calm his nerves. He couldn't believe he was about to be a famous actor. He had worked his entire life for this moment. He sacrificed his marriage for it. It better be worth it. Edison's first scene is a monologue about his character. He is the sheriff in this Wild West town and is on the prowl for a perpetrator. Much to the director's dismay, he changed both dialogue and blocking. The scene following his character's introduction is showing off his weapon of protection. Edison got too cocky and totally messed the scene up, but the director enjoyed it, so it made the final cut. Edison screwed up his next scene too. It was supposed to be of him sweeping his love interest off her feet, but instead, he fell on his butt and made a fool of himself in front of everyone. The director liked Edison's failure better. His next scene was arresting the alien suspect who was wreaking havoc on the town. He felt very powerful in this scene. It was the climax of the film, the pivotal moment for his character. His character locked the alien up in jail, saving the entire town. Edison wished people saw him like how the townspeople saw the sheriff. They worshipped him. Edison wanted to be worshipped. His penultimate scene was making himself a celebratory drink for capturing the bad guy and saving his town. There was real liquor in those bottles, so Edison's making himself an actual celebratory drink for slaying this role. Edison's final scene was the closing scene of the film. The sheriff sang a beautiful ballad for the members of the community. Edison found out later on that the director replaced his vocals with someone else's. This upset him. Edison left the set that night and felt on top of the world. He was officially a movie star. The public's perception of Edison as a leading man was not a good one. The film was the lowest grossing film of the year, and critics hated Edison's performance. Charlene sat in the rocking chair and reminisced about her life. It may be recency bias, but Atticus was her favorite among the children she nannied throughout the years. They had a special bond. Atticus never tired from Charlene reading books to him. He liked to imagine himself as the characters in the stories. He liked to picture himself anywhere but where he actually was. He hated being stuck in this townhouse day in and day out. He didn't understand why his father kept him hidden away from the world. He kept his thoughts to himself. He didn't want Miss Charlene to think that he wasn't grateful for her care and love. She was the only good thing in his life. He wished she was his age so he would never lose her like everyone else. Sometimes when his father wasn't home, Miss Charlene turned on the gramophone so he could dance. He liked how free he felt when he was dancing. If Miss Charlene was feeling extra generous that day, she would join the tot in a dance. They would erupt into a fit of giggles. It was some of Atticus's favorite memories of he and his nanny. Atticus had the best time with Miss Charlene. She even made bath time fun. He was a typical boy, so he preferred to get and stay dirty. But Miss Charlene was very persuasive. She put extra suds in the tub so Atticus was able to splash and play until his heart was content. By that point, he didn't even mind that Miss Charlene had to wash behind his ears. Edison became obsessed with reading the daily newspaper to see what was being said about him. None of it was good. Critics called him pretentious and entitled. He had gotten an agent, but was having a difficult time booking auditions. Nobody wanted to work with him because his director had told anyone who would listen that he was a talentless diva. His career was turning into a disaster, and that caused him to drink more heavily. This was not how his plan was supposed to play out. He had a bad reputation, and he no longer had his wife. Edison sat in the exact spot where Kate passed away, and he would experience a whirlwind of emotions. He missed her so much, but he was so angry that she left him before they could fall in love again. He knows he was cruel towards her, but all marriages have their ups and downs. It would have had more ups eventually. Instead, he was alone. He rarely changed out of his robe anymore. He had nowhere to go. His phone was silent and no one wanted to work with him. He spent the majority of his days in the speakeasy, avoiding his failed career and the child that ruined his marriage. Word had gotten around about his proclivity towards drinking, so the newspapers had ran with that. He had been labeled a drunk overnight, further tarnishing his reputation. Atticus had conflicting emotions about this day. It was his birthday. He wished his whole family could be there to celebrate with him. Charlene saw how sad the child was. No child should be sad on their birthday. She was determined to make the day special for her special boy. She baked her mother's world-famous birthday cake recipe. Atticus quietly played with his cars. Miss Charlene had convinced his father to allow him to sometimes play in the living room. She said it was not healthy for a growing boy to be trapped in his room. Edison graced his son with his presence for when he blew out the candles. He could not do so sober, so he brought not one, but 2 drinks with him to watch Atticus's milestone. It was a difficult day for him too. His wife should be here to celebrate her son aging into a child, but Edison took that away from her. The least he could do was be present. Miss Charlene held Atticus as he blew out his candles. Atticus's birthday wish was to make just one friend during this life stage. Maybe then he wouldn't feel so alone. Happy birthday, Atticus. The 1930s are creeping up quickly. Atticus's childhood trait is neurotic. This means he has a higher sensitivity towards sadness, stress, and anger. Having Edison as a father would do that to anyone. Nellie, the maid for the townhouse, came to clean up after Atticus's birthday party. Edison was surprised but very happy to see her. He had liquor running through his veins, so he was more confident around her. He flirted with her. Nellie was receptive to his advances, and even gives him a rose that she picked for him in her garden. She told him that she believed he was misunderstood in the press. Edison could not believe his actions following those kind words. He leaned in and kissed her. Charlene had witnessed the entire ordeal and was appalled. That kiss had awoken his libido for the first time since his wife passed away. He was brazen and infatuated. He invited Nellie up to his bed. Nellie agreed to get into bed with Edison. She didn't know why she said yes. He was her boss. Maybe it was because he was going through a rough time and she pitied him, or maybe it was because he was a celebrity. Edison did not care about the scandal that would be written about him for canoodling with his maid, who was a woman of color. All he cared about was getting his rocks off for the first time in years. Atticus decided to start keeping a journal where he wrote his most personal and important thoughts. The journal was almost like a friend, almost. He often wrote about how stir-crazy he was. He could not be in this house any longer. He wanted to get out and explore the world. He was very unhappy with his life right now. His father was not going to be of any help to give him attention or show him the world. He would have to do that himself. He made plans to go explore. Atticus boarded a train to Henford-on-Bagley. He had read about the town's beautiful forest area, and that's where he wanted to explore first. It was also the shortest train ride away from his hometown. He finally climbed the hill to see the breathtaking snail statue, and he began to weep. His father did him a disservice by locking him away. This was practically the first time he ever left the house. There was a whole world for Atticus to see for the first time in his life. He felt genuine happiness to be out in nature. He even packed his swimsuit in case he found a river to take a dip in. He thankfully did. He loved the warm summer air on his face while his body was in the cool water. Tom Barton was a boy around Atticus's age. He was a Henford-on-Bagley native. His home life was volatile. His mother had recently passed away, and that had caused his father to be prone to violent outbursts. He was an only child, so when his father got angry, it was always directed at him. Tom spent much of his time in the woods surrounding his house when he wasn't in school. Atticus thought about his life thus far. All he has ever known is sadness, and that damn townhouse. This place was more beautiful than his imagination could even conjure up. This was his new safe place. Atticus's daydream was interrupted by a boy introducing himself. He asked if he was also running away from something. Atticus said yes. From that moment on, Atticus and Tom were friends. Tom's method of coping with his situation was humor, so Atticus found him extremely funny. He told jokes that were vulgar and full of profanity. Atticus loved it. Tom taught him how to swear like a sailor. Tom asked him where he was from and was curious why he was in Henford on Bagley. Atticus begins to cry and tells him it is a long story and he probably wouldn't want to hear about it. Tom tells his new friend that he wants to know everything about him. That's what being friends was all about. They swim to shore so they can dry off and chat on the bench. Atticus explains his entire life story to Tom, sparing no details. It felt nice to open up about this to someone. Tom was very supportive and commented with reassurance when Atticus needed it. Tom shares that his mama passed away last year after being sick for his whole life. He missed her, but was glad she wasn't hurting anymore. He told him about the abuse he suffers at the hands of his father. Atticus sobbed for his new friend. His own home life was anything but spectacular, but at least his father never laid a hand on him. He wanted Tom to come live with him instead. Tom comforts Atticus and assured him that he will be fine. He is excellent at hiding in the forest. He has many hiding places. Atticus gives Tom his address just in case he ever needed him. Tom suggests that Atticus take a train out to visit him once a month. He wanted to show him his world. He promised that he would always have something new planned, so it was never a wasted trip. Atticus stated that it would never be a wasted trip because he got to see Tom. He barely knew the boy, but his intuition told him that Tom was a good egg and would be in his life for a very long time. They said their goodbyes and promised to meet in the same spot next month. Atticus was already counting down the days to see his friend again. Atticus wrote in his journal about his new friend, Tom. He had never met someone so fearless and fun to be around. He wished he was more like the other boy. Part of him worried that Tom wouldn't show up their spot next month and he would never see him again, but he pushed the thought away. He had to trust. Tom would be there for him when he needed him and vice versa. That's what being friends was all about, or at least that's what Atticus had read. He had never had a friend before, so this was new territory for him. Atticus danced by himself, like his own little happy dance. He didn't realize how much he needed a friend. Tom had healed parts of himself just from that first encounter. Tom was special. Nellie came by once a week to clean the townhouse. However, her arrival normally turned into a rendezvous with Edison. The man had an insatiable appetite and Nellie wasn't really in a position to deny him. The weekly hookups with Nellie had reinvigorated Edison. So much so that he wrote to every director in town and begged for a second chance. He blamed his behavior on the passing of his wife. Despite every negative comment said about him, Edison booked another leading role. His agent warned him that this was his last chance, and he needed to follow every direction given.